Alright, Gatos. This is Bellular. He makes really good videos about gaming content, and he just made a video. No, I am not losing the girls. They're gorgeous. Alright. This is Bellular. He's an excellent YouTuber. He makes great videos about gaming, and we are gamers. So he is touching on what I think just happened. So the Ubisoft CEO recently said that one of the games, to build hype around it, he said this isn't a AAA game. This is a quadruple A game. And I think this is the cursor of them warning us that the prices are going up, which, to their defense, they probably should go up because they haven't got up for like 20 years, 20, 30 years. But are we still getting more game or less game for our money? I don't know. Let's watch this video together and see what Collier has to say.
In the current environment, today's story is actually a fairly strange one. I'm going to start us off with a quote. Here it goes. "This marks the beginning of our turnaround to consistently creating and delivering high-quality, long-lasting games." That quote is from Yves Guillemot, the CEO of Ubisoft. And this is Ubisoft admitting what we all already knew in our hearts. That if you simply just made good games, people would in fact buy them. We can see what he said is essentially an admission that they've not been doing that. And their latest earnings report suggests that things are actually changing. But of course, it wouldn't be Ubisoft if they didn't do something silly. They have framed Skull and Bones as a quadruple A game, showing they absolutely can put
what the hell is quadruple A mean?
When they want to. As for you, well, keep your foot where it is, keep it out of my mouth, but I do have a quick little ask. And it is this: I'm preparing us for what I think could be a very financially tough year. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to grow our channels and to ensure that we are a safe place to work with high job security. One of the best ways that you can do that is zero cost, is to just consider hitting that subscribe button. It sends the algorithm a happy signal, right? So the more that happens, the more the algorithm is willing to experiment with our content and actually showing it to other people. That grows the show. When the show grows, that means more job safety and such for us, but it also means a greater ability to make it better. And that is my ambition. So I would appreciate it a lot. And with that said, let's talk a little bit about Ubisoft. So yes, the core idea that if it turns out you actually just make video games that are pretty good, people will buy them. It's a fairly insane statement. It's one that, of course, Sony have been doing pretty well at, but generally speaking, we've seen so many pretty mid games with high asking prices.
Really good game.
With a lot of the sell being, trust me, bro, the roadmap, and that just hasn't really worked for people. So this is the strategy that Yves Guillemot is talking about. This is in his comments on their most recent financial reporting.
The roadmap.
This quarter provided us with positive momentum and marks the beginning of our turnaround to consistently creating and delivering high-quality, long-lasting games. Our performance was driven by the releases of Assassin's Creed Mirage and Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, by the continued strong trajectory of the Crew Motorfest, as well as robust
Mirage wasn't very good.
Back catalog. So that is fairly good. And looking at Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora and Assassin's Creed Mirage, we do see games that are not 9 out of 10s. Many would argue they're not 8 out of 10s, maybe 7 out of 10s, 7.5 out of 10s. But I would at least argue that while those games probably are not going to be absolute massive top of chart sellers, I think they will sell pretty well because they're both offering people a slice of something that they want. In the case of Avatar, well, yes, it is sort of Pocahontas, Far Cry 3. The thing is, though, actually,
both games are
really suits playing a Navi
and they're touting them as awesome.
The Far Cry formula has even fit some of the Far Cry games. And as for Assassin's Creed Mirage, well, it's a slice of historical fanfiction, which is pretty good, doesn't set the world on fire, but it's enough that the people who are interested in it were actually willing to buy it, as evidenced by these numbers. And this is, of course, in the broad context of Ubisoft essentially pulling the brakes hard a few years ago, because they essentially realized, hang on a second, most of what we're doing is a load of wank that people don't actually want, as evidenced by some of their releases, the things that did make it out during that period of time. And it's when we get into the numbers that you see the impact. Their net bookings are up 43% quarter on quarter for Q3, and 45.1% for the essentially the sort of 9-month block year over year.
Bookings,
that's a massive
future
increase.
sales.
Of course, Ubisoft's back catalog is a pretty strong one. They do rely on that rather heavily, but it's quite notable that this is their first major release since Mario plus Rabbids Spark of Hope, which initially underperformed and then did somewhat rally, because it turns out it's actually a really good game. That gave it a little bit more of a long tail. What Ubi themselves say is this: players' very positive response to our latest major releases, such as Assassin's Creed Mirage and the Crew Motorfest, show we are indeed moving in the right direction. Now, of course, we're not getting actual numbers here, but that being said, Insider Gaming, they have sources at Ubisoft, and through their sources, some financial data has actually came out. So here's how things stand. Prince of Persia, we're looking at 300,000 players, $15 million of revenue. That's Prince of Persia Lost Crown, and that $15 million of revenue would basically be its launch 2 weeks, because it came out about the middle of January to pretty damn good critical reception, which is not really to be that surprising. It was made by Ubisoft Montpellier, and they had previously done the Rayman games. The Rayman games that they did, graphically stunning, very, very highly regarded. So it's good to see that studio actually just getting to make a sort of real traditional game. Prince of Persia, of course, was initially a side-scrolling sort of thing. Anyway, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora came out late last year. They're saying 1.9 million players, $133 million of
that
revenue.
game popped off.
And then Assassin's Creed Mirage, right? 5 million players, $250 million of revenue. All right,
Mirage.
That is a very, very large success for our industry. Take a look at, say, Spider-Man 2. It was looking at, I believe, $320-ish million for its overall budget, with $120 million being contributed to that by Marvel in return, of course, for a revenue share. And I think it had sold around 5 million copies, but what we learned is that it needed to sell 7 million copies at full price in order to break even. You then look at a game like Assassin's Creed Mirage, you seem to be getting some similar-ish financial performance there, but I think pretty clearly from a game that did not cost that amount of money to develop. Now, there are some other numbers we can compare to, and that is The Division and The Division 2. The Division was looking at $330 million, The Division 2, $264 million in their comparative periods, as is put by Insider Gaming. Now, of course, the traditional wisdom has been that the live services make more money. What I'd overall say there is The Division really did sell a grand vision. I'm sure you remember the E3 presentations where we listened to, of course, the most famous gamer, Bronson, the fake gamers that Ubisoft sort of made to do the voice comm demonstrations of their games like Siege, like The Division. But of course, if you remember what it was like back then, the levels of hype for The Division were utterly off the charts. Similar to a Watch Dogs 1 situation, where even if Watch Dogs 1 then does legitimately get followed up by far better games, well, the thing is, it's that initial vision. That, I think, is a large part of why The Division and The Division 2 actually made the money that they did in those comparative periods. So in a way, yes, we're seeing some of these traditional games are not really having the initial financial performance of a big live service product. That being said, when you look at those numbers for The Division and The Division 2, I think you've got to really think right, are those numbers a fragment of a bygone era? Were those numbers created in a landscape where the broad consumer perception was that live services actually were a pretty cool thing that had potential? Where they essentially had the idea of, okay, it's this sort of post-fall, almost little bit of an apocalypse thing, but instead of it being Destiny with fantasy elements, it's going to be The Division. It's going to feel a little bit more grounded, right? But that period of time is just not one that we currently exist in. So in this modern slice of time, this modern context, the idea that Assassin's Creed Mirage gets 5 million players, $250 million in revenue, is something that Ubisoft are actually really happy about.
Okay, so there's still some pretty die-hard Assassin's Creed
A lot of the thinking in companies like this is essentially of following numbers. These are numbers that essentially show that the sort of game format that a lot of us are interested in is still viable if it's done, correct cost, correct IP, correct level of scale. We then must remember it's not all about revenue. It's also, I think more importantly, about operating profit. And let's just think about the cost of revenue for some of these games. Yes, The Division and The Division 2 brought in a lot of money, both cases more than Assassin's Creed Mirage. However, The Division then had to come with a lot of support from staff that have to be paid. Whereas with Assassin's Creed Mirage, it is more fundamentally a one and done game. You make your money, you add something to your back catalogue, something that Ubisoft say is very strong for them, and then you get to move on, instead of doing that sort of unprofitable work trying to get a live service to exist where it fundamentally just doesn't really have the legs. And one thing that I found to be notable here is that while, yes, Prince of Persia is the lowest here in terms of players and revenues, and let's think about why, it's a revival of a brand that really
I feel
has
like
suffered,
Assassin's Creed
and it's
2
also a
looked and
2D
felt
take.
smoother than
It's, yes, more in line with the originals of Prince of Persia, but obviously it's not what a lot of modern Prince of Persia fans actually would have expected or perhaps wanted, and it's also, in comparison to a lot of those numbers, a game that has quite simply not been out for as much time. Ubisoft, though, are still speaking rather bullishly about it. They said the fourth quarter represents an opportunity to continue on the momentum with the launch of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, a game that illustrates Ubisoft's capacity to revive iconic brands. And looking at that, I think it's refreshing to just see an acknowledgement that you can make a good game, it'll sell pretty decently, and even if it doesn't land all of the day one sales in the universe, it's still something that you can sort of boast about, be happy about, actually get a PR win. I mean, look at this, 87 top critic average and 95% of critics recommend. When sale periods happen, I think more people will pick up The Lost Crown. And I think it's also a game that will be a vital part of their back catalogue as we move forward into a newer era of gaming. Number one, this is not a game that is on Steam. For a lot of people who own Steam Decks, that just means they're not going to play it. I don't know about you, but at least a side-scroller game like this, even though, yep, people did play it on home entertainment systems, to me, this says Game Boy Advance days. This says PlayStation Portable. Well, the Steam Deck is massive. This is a game that is not on Steam. When this comes to Steam, that will be a very, very large opportunity for revenue. And, indeed, there are rumors swirling that PlayStation are even looking into some sort of portable console. If that is the case, then again, you can see a game like Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown just going on there and doing real good back catalog performance for a long time. Now, there is a little bit of live service stuff to talk about, but
was pretty impressive.
They, of course, have the promise of two big single-player games coming out in fiscal year 2025. Those are Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Red. And honestly, like, looking at Outlaws, and remember, I'm not a core Star Wars fan. Look, if it's a good game, I'll buy it. If it looks interesting, I'll give it a shot. Outlaws actually looks like a game that I am super interested in playing. And honestly, same goes for Assassin's Creed Red. I mean, even just in terms of the setting of that game, well, it's already been market validated by a certain other game that came out on the PlayStation. But of course, even though a lot of this is looking quite good for those of us who want those traditional single-player games that aren't, you know, all the annoying bollocks that really has just become synonymous with AAA these days, there is still some bollocks to talk about, so let's go through that. Okay, they don't want to have all of their eggs in the basket of good games with reasonable costs that sell well, so there is a little bit with X-Defiant. X-Defiant, of course, is a game that's trying to go a bit against the grain. It's positioning itself as the Call of Duty competitor for people who don't like skill-based matchmaking, for people who maybe loved Call of Duty Black Ops 2's multiplayer suite. Well, we do have the confirmation that it's scheduled for launch before the 31st of March 2024.
Okay,
that
this
being
looks
said,
fun.
insider gaming sources do suggest that the game has, quote, faced near monthly internal delays because of last-minute decisions to include additional features that break the current build.
That sucks.
Certainly a rather painful thing. When I look at that game, I thought, gee, you know, Modern Warfare 3 had a brutal critical reception, even though it does seem to be played by a lot of people. You've got to wonder, could X-Defiant have actually went toe-to-toe? Or even if they did have some critical, you know, sort of one-ups over Call of Duty, would the brand power have simply overwhelmed them? As much as I'd like to be hopeful, perhaps the brand power just would have won out. That being said, we do have to talk about the quadruple A game, the game that has been in some form of, like, you know, an open access thing that is about to enter its premium access before its real launch on the 16th of February. And that is Skull and Bones, because Skull and Bones' open beta started the same day as their financial reporting. And for Ubisoft, in and amongst the various queries that accompanied the earnings call, where, you know, analysts, etc., will just ask questions. And with that, one rather
This looks like a
enterprising
pirate game.
shareholder decided to ask a question, right? A
I'm
question
very excited.
about what they saw as a disparity.
I like pirate
Why
games.
is Ubisoft charging $70 for Skull and Bones when the game's roadmap and Eves' comment suggested that it was leaning into the live service model, a model that typically relies on being free to play or at least cheap when you buy it initially and then having monetization over time. Whereas the
streamers have
$70 price
sponsorships
tag,
for
of course,
Skulls and
says
Bones.
this is the level of quality. You know, this is a bigger thing. This is going to be standing. I mean, literally price point to price point with big Sony games. And here is the vigorous defense of Skull and Bones by Yves Guillemot, where he said, "You will see that Skull and Bones is a fully fledged game.
So it's going to be like
a very big game, and we feel
like
people
World of Warcraft
will
when it came
really
out.
see
where you
how
still had
vast
to pay
and
for
complete
the
the game
initial
is.
license
It's
and then the
really a
subscription
full
fee.
triple, nay, quadruple A game that will deliver in the long run. Now, that's
Quadruple
interesting language. It is language similar to what they've used previously. Internally, you see both Beyond Good and Evil 2 and Skull and Bones have been presented as quadruple A games. I mean, I don't really know what the extra A is supposed to buy us. At this stage, it does appear to be a triple A game made with even more chaos than what typically comes with making a triple A game. Now, obviously, Yves is not going to go around trashing his own game in his own investor call. That would be a rather silly move. But being real, I think when audiences actually see this game and are faced with the purchase decision, the only thing that will strike them as quadruple A is the price tag,
ratings.
especially when we think about that premium early access. What a lovely thing that's
premium early access?
Or perhaps when the Singaporean government realized that, well, this is all that their subsidies have funded. You got to remember, perhaps one of the reasons why this game wasn't canned is there were massive subsidies from the Singaporean government to actually, well, fund the Ubisoft studio that is there in Singapore. It was propped up by some government funding, right? It is also a game that was greenlit, that was intended back in an era where everyone was placing a massive bet for the future. You got to remember, this was all kicking off in and around the time of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Black Flag came out in 2013.
Our game is so good, we made a rating for it.
Naval combat, which was something that they had basically learned how to do with Assassin's Creed 3. Now, a game that at that point in time was hype beyond hype
plus A squared
is Destiny. This is the era where everyone was trying to do a Destiny because they very obviously saw the absolutely gargantuan audience interest that there was in that game. That at that time was the new thing from the creators of Halo, free from all the baggage that we know of today. That is what this game is. This game essentially is one of those living fossils. I have no idea how its launch is going to be. I might actually put myself through the experience of playing it because, hey, maybe you guys will get a few laughs
if
out
it's
of it.
good, I'll
so
stream
essentially
it.
where we stand is the ending of an era, a world where making
premium early access,
throwing
premium
so much money at a problem
that
barely anybody can do it, and with a humongous graveyard. In that context, and looking at some of these sales, such as Assassin's Creed, selling, as Ubisoft themselves say, essentially selling on par with a, air quotes, big Assassin's Creed game. Well, I think you see that maybe some of the sorts of games that you and I would want to see more of, games that more resemble those that actually formed our love of this medium, of this industry, are they actually looking like the less risky bet now? In the case of Assassin's Creed Mirage, it certainly does seem so. That's it for today's video. Let me know what you think. If you would like to support what we do, of course, liking, subscribing really does help. And you can go to bellular.ghost.io. That's where you can directly support our team in a financial manner. And in return for that,
he's actually tried to
which we publish 5 days a week, early access to our videos, to our research reports, and of course, we can hang out with us in the Members Lounge Discord. Your support truly does make the difference in these honestly, pretty rough times. But I'm becoming ever more, I suppose, confident that this kind of direction that we're all building together is a good one. Okay, thank you for everything. Have a brilliant day. I'll see you again tomorrow.
I don't know. It's going to be a long time before I trust Ubisoft again. It's going to be a long time because they took that Assassin's Creed franchise, built it up in a good way, and then just shot it to hell. Alright, so like you said, subscribing helps. I'm going to provide a like and a comment. So all three helped these creators of the algorithm. You're like, Sudge, Ubisoft. Ubisoft. A plus 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 games. Comment. uh, our game is good. We made the report. Yeah, that's true. The famous downgrades did me in forever. Oh, the infamous. Are you trying to say infamous or the famous downgrades? Okay. I'll share this with you guys. If you guys don't already follow Bellular, I highly recommend it. He's a really good creator, streamer, and he's actually trying to uh, do his own game. So let me tab over to Kick, where I have my one bot viewer that is always online watching me. I appreciate you, lonely bot. Hopefully one day there's more bots or something to help me out on Kick.